The rain hammered against the glass windows of the small city cafe, turning the morning into a blur of gray streaks and cold air. Inside, every seat was taken, every corner packed, every table surrounded by people rushing toward warmth. Among them stood a man with tired eyes and a soaked jacket, looking utterly out of place, almost invisible to everyone except the woman who glanced up and noticed the subtle tremble in his hands and the loneliness carved into his expression. That single glance would change both their lives, but in that moment, she couldn't know that the man struggling to find a simple seat was actually a millionaire single dad hiding in plain clothing, trying desperately to escape the chaos of his own world. And so begins a story of kindness, broken hearts, second chances, and unexpected healing. That if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of helping strangers, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Olivia Carter had chosen that cafe because it was the only place in the city where she could breathe for a moment. At 29, she felt stuck between the weight of a job she didn't love and the aftershocks of a heartbreak she hadn't fully healed from. She kept herself busy as a designer for a small agency, drawing ideas she no longer believed in, smiling through days she barely felt present in. That morning, she had come to the cafe hoping for creativity, or at least a moment of peace, but instead she found herself watching a drenched stranger scan the room for somewhere, anywhere, to sit. Something about the way he hunched his shoulders, as if trying to make himself smaller, made her chest tighten. Without thinking, she raised her hand slightly and gestured to the empty seat across from her. And that small gesture was all it took. The man introduced himself simply as Ethan, but there was something quietly powerful about the way he carried himself. His hair was messy from the rain, his jaw slightly unshaven, and his clothes were the kind of plain, worn pieces someone would wear when they didn't want to be recognized. Olivia couldn't guess that he was actually Ethan Hughes, a man whose business empire stretched farther than most could imagine, a man whose face occasionally appeared in magazines, but only when he allowed it. Today, he was simply a father trying to escape a board meeting that had spiraled into arguments over money and priorities he no longer cared about. The world saw him as a man of wealth, but inside, he was a man who felt like he had lost everything after losing his wife 3 years earlier. Raising his 6-year-old daughter alone had become both his greatest responsibility and greatest fear, and sometimes, he just needed to disappear for a moment to breathe. As they sat together, the cafe around them buzzed with noise, but something about the presence of the other made the world feel quieter. Olivia found herself observing him, noticing how his hands wrapped around the warm cup as if needing its heat. Ethan watched her sketch in her notebook, her fingers moving with a softness he hadn't seen in anyone in a long time. They didn't talk much, yet the silence between them felt strangely comfortable, as if their hearts understood each other's sadness before words even formed. Ethan found himself returning to the same cafe the next morning, then again the next week, and Olivia always seemed to be there, sometimes drawing, sometimes lost in her thoughts, sometimes smiling absent-mindedly at the people passing by outside. As days turned into weeks, the table they shared slowly became their quiet sanctuary. They exchanged small pieces of their struggles, never too much at once, always just enough for the other to understand. Olivia learned that Ethan was raising a young daughter alone, though he kept his identity hidden. Ethan learned that Olivia had once dreamed of designing children's books but had given up after a bad partnership failed and left her doubting her talent. The more they spoke, the more Ethan realized how long it had been since someone looked at him like he was human and not a walking bank vault. Olivia didn't know who he was, and that was the first thing that made him breathe easier. For once, he didn't have to pretend. For once, someone saw him, not his wealth. And Olivia, though she didn't know why, felt drawn to his quiet strength, the way he listened without judgment, the gentle sadness in his eyes that mirrored the loneliness in her own heart. But life rarely stays simple, and the truth always finds a way to surface. One afternoon, Ethan didn't show up at their usual time. Olivia waited, telling herself she wasn't waiting, telling herself it didn't matter, yet checking the door every few minutes. Hours passed. Days. A week. And the empty seat across from her became heavier each time she looked at it. She had let herself care for someone who had vanished without explanation, and memories of past betrayals clawed their way back into her mind. She forced herself to stop coming to the cafe, telling herself she had been foolish for believing in something so fragile. Meanwhile, Ethan had not disappeared willingly. His daughter, little Amelia, had fallen severely ill, and he had spent nights in the hospital praying that nothing else would be taken from him. He wanted to reach out to Olivia, wanted to explain, but fear held him back, fear of burdening her, fear of bringing chaos into her already fragile life. And a deeper fear he didn't want to admit, that she would look at him differently if she learned who he truly was. Weeks later, when Amelia recovered, Ethan returned to the cafe, only to find Olivia gone. The absence hit him harder than he expected. In the quiet corner where they had once shared mornings, he now felt an ache of regret. He had run from the truth, from himself, and now he had lost the only person who made him feel alive again. Fate, however, is gentle sometimes, just enough to give a wounded heart another chance. They crossed paths again on a winter evening, not in the cafe, but outside a community art center where Olivia was helping set up a small exhibition. She had taken a step toward her old dream, encouraged by the memory of Ethan's quiet belief in her talent. And when she saw him standing there, dressed simply but no longer hiding, her breath caught. She expected anger to rise inside her, but instead she felt something deeper, hurt mixed with relief, fear mixed with longing. Ethan stood before her, eyes apologetic, holding his daughter's small hand. Amelia looked up at Olivia with curious, warm eyes, and something inside Olivia softened. Ethan confessed, not just about disappearing, but about who he truly was. A millionaire, yes, but also a father who had felt lost, overwhelmed, and afraid. A man who had found comfort in her kindness and had feared losing it if she knew the truth. His words weren't desperate or dramatic. They were simply honest, and in that honesty, Olivia saw the man she had cared for all along, the man who had sat at her table looking broken in the rain. Healing didn't happen instantly, but step by step, Ethan began showing Olivia the pieces of his world, and she let him show her. She met Amelia, who loved Olivia's drawings and asked her to teach her how to make butterflies from colored paper. Slowly, gently, Olivia realized that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet presence of someone who returns, even after life tears them away. And Ethan learned that love didn't need to be hidden. It only needed to be honest. Months later, standing in the same cafe where everything began, Ethan held Olivia's hand as Amelia sketched tiny hearts in her notebook beside them. The rain was falling again outside, but this time the sound felt comforting. This time, they were not alone. Olivia looked around at the crowded cafe and realized how one act of kindness, one simple gesture, had changed her entire life. And Ethan looked at her and knew he had finally found the one place where he didn't need to hide anymore. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world, and it helps us create more stories like this. Before the ending, please comment, kindness creates miracles. With time, love grew naturally between them, not forced, not rushed. Olivia became a gentle light in Amelia's life, and Ethan became the quiet strength Olivia had always needed. And together, they built something beautiful, not because of wealth, not because of grand gestures, but because two hurting hearts found each other when they least expected it. And all of it began on a rainy morning, in a crowded cafe, with a single empty chair and a woman who believed in kindness enough to offer it to a stranger.